Every empire writes a story in gold and paper. A new currency rises, dominates global trade, then drowns in the very wealth it creates. For nearly 6 centuries, the world's reserve currencies have followed the same script: rise, peak, overreach, and collapse. And the latest actor on that stage is the US dollar. To see where we are headed, we need to sail back to where it all began. The year is 1450. Europe's spice routes are cut off after the fall of Constantinople. While others stare at closed maps, a small seafaring nation, Portugal, looks outward. Armed with new navigation tools, Portuguese explorers chart sea routes across Africa to India and the Far East. Their success turns Lisbon into the trading capital of the world, and the Portuguese Real becomes the first currency trusted across continents. From Africa to Japan, merchants accept it without question. But greatness breeds exhaustion. Maintaining forts and colonies on 4 continents eventually drains Portugal's treasury. Succession crisis and rival powers, the Dutch, the French, the British, circle like sharks. By 1580, Spain absorbs Portugal, and the Real's reign of just 80 years is over. Spain's rise begins deep in the Bolivian Andes. In 1545, miners uncover Potosi, the mountain of silver so rich it fuels a global economy. Spain mints the famous pieces of 8 coins that circulate from Europe to Asia, the world's first truly global currency. The Spanish dollar even serves as legal tender in the young United States centuries later. But silver's blessing turns into a curse. An endless flood of metal fuels massive inflation. Prices in Spain quadruple. Kings borrow recklessly to fight wars and default 4 times in 1 century. When the silver flows slows, the empire's economy collapses. By the mid-1600s, the Spain's monetary empire crumbles, another victim of overreach and debt. Out of Spain's ashes rises a new power, the Dutch Republic. Unlike empires built on conquest, the Dutch build theirs on commerce and finance. Amsterdam becomes the Wall Street of its age. The Bank of Amsterdam introduces reliable clearing systems. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange lists the world's first publicly traded company, the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch guilder becomes Europe's preferred medium of exchange, backed by innovation, transparency, and trust. From 1640 to 1720, the Dutch dominate over a third of world trade. But prosperity again invites hubris. Wars with Britain drain their coffers, and the once mighty Dutch East India Company collapses under corruption and debt. By the late 1700s, financial leadership shifts west to London. The 18th and 19th centuries belong to Britain. Fueled by steam, coal, and the Industrial Revolution, the pound sterling becomes the engine of global trade. At its peak, over 60% of the world's commerce is invoiced in pounds. London is the heart of the global banking and insurance industries. The gold standard, formalized in 1816, makes the pound synonymous with stability. By the 1920s, Britain rules 1/4 of the planet and 1/5 of its people. Then, history turns. 2 world wars devastate the empire. Debt explodes from £650 million in 1914 to £7 billion by 1919, and by the end of World War II, it reaches 270% of GDP. Britain wins wars but loses the economic battle. The world now needs a new anchor. July 1944, New Hampshire. Delegates from 44 allied nations gather at the Mount Washington Hotel to rebuild the shattered global economy. Britain is bankrupt. The United States, untouched by war, holds 2/3 of the world's gold and half of its industrial output. The delegates choose pragmatism over pride. Every major currency will be pegged to the US dollar, and the dollar will be convertible into gold at $35 an ounce. Thus is born the Bretton Woods system, a dollar as good as gold. To guard the system, they create 2 new institutions: the International Monetary Fund to lend and police exchange rates, and the World Bank to rebuild Europe and later developing nations. It's more than a financial agreement. It's a transfer of global leadership from the British pound to the American dollar. For 25 years, the system hums perfectly. Trade surges, reconstruction flourishes, and the dollar becomes the backbone of world commerce. But behind the prosperity, America begins to overspend, financing the Vietnam War, the space race, and massive social programs. Dollars flood the world while US gold reserves shrink. By the late 1960s, nations like France demand gold for their dollars. Shiploads of bullion sail back to Europe. The Bretton Woods promise is cracking. August 15, 1971. American President Richard Nixon appears on television and says, "I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold." Temporarily, he said, but forever in practice. The US could no longer cover its promises. The gold window closes, ending the gold standard. Money is no longer tied to the yellow metal, only to trust. The world braces for collapse until America invents a new anchor. During the 1973 oil crisis, the US quietly strikes a deal with Saudi Arabia. All oil will be sold only in US dollars. In return, the US will provide military protection. By 1975, every OPEC nation adopts the same rule. If you need oil, you need dollars. Thus, the petrodollar is born, a new invisible gold standard backed by global energy demand. This brilliant maneuver keeps the dollar indispensable. It allows America to run massive deficits, finance wars, and still have the world willingly hold its currency. The 20th century becomes the American century. Through the 1980s and 1990s, the dollar reigns unchallenged. The Soviet Union collapses, the US markets boom, and globalization accelerates. By the year 2000, over 70% of global reserves are held in dollars. Oil, gold, and debt, everything is priced in US dollar. The world's savings sit in US treasuries. But, as history warns, peaks never last. The 2008 financial crisis exposes the fragility of the system. To rescue banks and markets, the Federal Reserve prints trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. Confidence wavers, and countries start questioning a system where one nation controls everyone's money supply. Meanwhile, China emerges as a manufacturing superpower, Russia as an energy hub, and developing economies begin trading in local currencies. Global dollar reserves fall from 70% to 58%. Foreign ownership of US treasuries slides from 50% to 30%. America's debt, now over $38 trillion or 120% of GDP, mirrors the late stages of past empires. The rhyme of history grows louder. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, expand to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Indonesia, and the UAE. Together, they launched the BRICS Bridge, a payment network settling trade via local currencies, and central bank digital money bypassing the dollar. Russia sells oil to Asia in yuan and rupees. China signs long-term commodity contracts in its own currency. Central banks worldwide hoard gold at record levels. For the first time in 80 years, the world is building an alternative. Look back, and every reserve currency has marched through 4 unmistakable stages. Rise, when innovation sparks global trust. Peak, the currency becomes universal. Overextension, when wars, debt, and complacency erode stability. Decline, when confidence fades and power shifts. The Portuguese Real, 80 years. The Spanish Silver, 110 years. The Dutch Guildar, 80 years. The British Pound, over 200 years. The US dollar, 81 years and counting. History's rhythm is steady, only the tempo changes. The US now maintains 900 military bases in 130 countries, has spent over $8 trillion on wars since 2001, and runs record fiscal deficits year after year. At the same time, energy deals outside the dollar are rising, and the digital era offers new monetary experiments. The foundations of the dollar's dominance are shaking, slowly but unmistakably. When the British pound lost its throne, it took decades. The US overtook Britain economically long before the dollar replaced the pound. This transition too may unfold quietly, not one currency replacing another, but many sharing power, digital, regional, and commodity-backed. Perhaps there will be no single emperor of money again, only competing kingdoms. The story of reserve currencies is really the story of human nature, of ambition, innovation, excess, and decline. Every empire believes it's different. Everyone thinks it can outspend gravity. But as history shows, power built on debt never lasts forever. The dollar's chapter isn't over yet, but the pages are thinning and thinning fast. And somewhere out there, the next global currency is quietly being written into history. Or are we seeing gold making a grand comeback? If this journey through 600 years of money and empires helped you see today's headlines differently, hit like, share it with someone curious about the future of finance, and subscribe for more stories on how money, power, and history always move in cycles. Thank you.